OA destroyed my yacht. They never checked the name on the Marina Deed full YouTube script. On the morning of June 18, 2024, a yellow excavator lowered its steel bucket through the roof of a 50-year-old wooden yacht at Mercer Point Marina. The first strike shattered the cabin windows. The second snapped the mast. By the third, splintered mahogany was falling into the water like broken bones. Standing 20 feet away, wearing white slacks and holding a blue HOA clipboard, Vanessa Crowley watched the destruction with a satisfied smile. "Maybe now he'll understand," she told the contractor, loud enough for the gathering residents to hear. "Allied boats do not belong in our community." No one noticed the gray pickup turning into the marina parking lot. No one paid attention to the man who stepped out wearing faded jeans, oil-stained work boots, and a denim shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. He was 58 years old, broad-shouldered, sunburned, and quiet. His name was Daniel Mercer. He walked past the residents, filming with their phones. He walked past the red violation notice tied to the dock rail. Then he stopped beside the broken brass nameplate that had fallen from the yacht's stern, the Eleanor. Daniel bent down and picked it up with both hands. The excavator operator saw him and shut off the engine. Vanessa stepped forward. "You were given 72 hours to remove that vessel," she said. "You ignored a lawful HOA order." Daniel wiped sawdust from the brass plate with his thumb. Then he looked at what remained of the boat his father had built. "Who authorized this?" he asked. "I did." Vanessa raised her clipboard as if it were a badge. The board voted unanimously. "This marina is controlled by the Mercer Point Homeowners Association." Daniel looked at her for several seconds. Then he asked one question. "Did anyone on your board check the marina deed?" Vanessa laughed. "The HOA controls this marina." Daniel placed the broken nameplate on the hood of his truck. "No," he said. "You rent it. By sunset." Vanessa Crowley would learn that the man she had called a trespasser owned every dock, every access road, and every foot of shoreline beneath her expensive waterfront community. But by then, she had already destroyed the one thing money could not replace. Mercer Point sat on the western shore of Lake Wabash in central Missouri. The lake itself had been created in the 1960s, when the county dammed a branch of the Wabash River for flood control and recreation. Back then, the shoreline was mostly timber, pasture, and limestone. There were no gated homes, no private security patrols, no architectural review committees. There was only a gravel road, a bait shop, and a small marina built by a carpenter named Samuel Mercer. Samuel was Daniel's grandfather. In 1968, he purchased 14 acres of shoreline for $11,600. With help from his two sons, he cleared the brush, drove pilings into the lake bed, and built 12 wooden docks by hand. He called the place Mercer Point Marina. It was never fancy. Farmers stored aluminum fishing boats there. Retired teachers kept old runabouts under patched canvas covers. Families grilled hamburgers beside the launch ramp on Sunday afternoons. Samuel charged enough to pay the taxes and repair the docks. He was more interested in creating a place people could afford than in making himself rich. Over the next 30 years, the area changed. The gravel road was paved. The bait shop became a restaurant. Old cabins were torn down and replaced by lake houses with stone entrances, private pools, and three-car garages. In 2008, a developer purchased most of the surrounding land and created the Mercer Point Estates subdivision. The developer wanted the marina included in the sale. Samuel's daughter, Eleanor Mercer, refused. She would allow residents to use the docks, but she would not sell the shoreline her father had built. Instead, she signed a renewable access agreement with the new Homeowners Association. The agreement was 38 pages long. Most residents never read it. Most board members did not read it either. They assumed the HOA owned the marina because the association collected dock fees, issued parking stickers, and scheduled maintenance. For 15 years, that assumption caused no serious problems. Then Vanessa Crowley became HOA president. Vanessa had moved to Mercer Point from St. Louis after her husband sold a chain of dental clinics. She was organized, ambitious, and deeply concerned with appearances. Within 6 months of being elected, she changed the neighborhood entrance sign, banned visible trash cans, and required residents to submit paint samples before repainting their mailboxes. She also formed a Marina Standards Committee. The committee approved new rules covering boat length, hull color, canvas condition, fuel containers, and even the type of rope owners could use at the docks. Vanessa's stated goal was simple. She wanted Mercer Point to look exclusive. "The marina is the front porch of our community," she said during one board meeting, "and right now parts of that porch look like a repair yard." Most residents accepted the new rules. Some even liked them. Property values were rising, and the marina was filled with expensive fiberglass cruisers, polished wake boats, and 2 yachts worth more than the average house in the county. Then Daniel Mercer returned to town. Daniel had grown up at the marina. As a boy, he spent more time in the machine shed than in his own bedroom. His father, Thomas Mercer, repaired boat engines and built wooden hulls using techniques he had learned from Samuel. Daniel learned to sharpen chisels before he learned to drive. By 12, he could rebuild a carburetor. By 16, He could identify most marine engines by sound alone. He eventually left Missouri and spent nearly 30 years working as a marine diesel mechanic along the Gulf Coast. He repaired tugboats, shrimp boats, and emergency generators. He was never wealthy, but he was good at his work and he lived simply. When his mother Eleanor died in February 2024, Daniel returned to Mercer Point to settle the estate. The 14-acre marina property passed directly to him. The transfer was recorded at the county courthouse on March 4. Daniel did not announce it. There was no reason to. The HOA's access agreement still had 11 months remaining, and Daniel did not intend to disrupt the residents. He planned to inspect the docks, review the financial records, and decide what repairs were needed before renewing the agreement. He also had one personal task. At the far end of a rented storage building sat a 52-foot wooden yacht called the Eleanor. Thomas Mercer had built the boat in 1974. He named it after Daniel's mother. The hull was made from mahogany planking over white oak frames. The deck was teak. Brass fittings had been salvaged from an old river launch. It took Thomas 3 years to finish. The Eleanor was not a factory yacht. There was no second one. Every cabinet, rail, and hatch had been shaped by Thomas Mercer's hands. When Daniel was a child, the family spent summers aboard her. They slept in quiet coves, fished before sunrise, and ate dinner on the rear deck, while his father told stories about the lake before the big houses arrived. After Eleanor became ill, the yacht was placed in storage. It had not moved under its own power in 7 years. By the time Daniel returned, the white paint had faded to gray. One cabin window was cracked, the brass rails had turned green, and the port engine needed a full rebuild. To Vanessa Crowley, it looked abandoned. To Daniel, it was the last room in which his whole family was still alive. He arranged to move the Eleanor to Dock 12. Dock 12 was the oldest berth in the marina and the only one long enough to hold her without blocking the channel. Daniel planned to restore the yacht over the summer. He replaced the bilge pumps, tested the shore power, and began removing rotten sections of the cabin roof. He worked mostly at night after the residents had gone home. That was how Vanessa first saw him. It was shortly after 7 on a Thursday morning when Vanessa walked down the dock with the Marina Standards Committee. She stopped in front of the Eleanor as if she had found a wrecked car in her driveway. Daniel was kneeling on the rear deck removing a corroded hinge. Vanessa called up to him. "Excuse me, who authorized this vessel?" Daniel looked over the rail. "I did." Vanessa glanced at the peeling paint. "That was not my question." Daniel climbed down to the dock. Vanessa wore sunglasses, a white visor, and shoes that had never touched engine oil. 2 committee members stood behind her. One was holding a tablet. The other was taking photographs. "This marina is restricted to Mercer Point residents and approved guests," Vanessa said. "Your boat has no permit sticker. I'm aware of that." "Then you are aware that it cannot remain here." Daniel looked toward the parking lot. "Who told you the HOA owns this dock?" Vanessa lowered her sunglasses. "The association has controlled this facility for 15 years. "That wasn't what I asked." One of the committee members shifted uncomfortably. Vanessa's expression hardened. "Are you a resident?" "No." "Do you own a home in Mercer Point Estates?" "No." "Then you have no right to occupy a private berth." Daniel could have ended the argument in 10 seconds. He could have told them his name. He could have walked to his truck and returned with a certified copy of the deed. But he had spent enough years around loud people to know that someone determined not to listen rarely learned from an explanation. So he simply said, "I have every right to be here." Vanessa looked past him at the yacht. "That vessel is an eyesore." Daniel said nothing. "It may also be a safety hazard." Still nothing. "And I have received reports that someone has been sleeping aboard. I worked late 2 nights. That constitutes unauthorized occupancy." Daniel picked up his toolbox. "You should read the marina agreement." Vanessa smiled without warmth. "You should remove your boat." Daniel walked back aboard the Eleanor. Behind him, Vanessa said, "You will receive formal notice." He did. That afternoon, a red violation tag was attached to the dock rail. It gave him 72 hours to remove the yacht. The notice listed 5 violations: unauthorized docking, failure to display a permit, unapproved exterior condition, possible environmental hazard, overnight occupancy. At the bottom was Vanessa Crowley's signature. Daniel removed the notice carefully and folded it into his shirt pocket. Then he went back to work. By the following morning, every resident in Mercer Point had received an email from the HOA. The subject line read, "Unauthorized vessel at marina." Vanessa wrote that an unidentified non-resident had occupied Dock 12 without permission. She claimed the vessel was deteriorated, potentially unsafe and inconsistent with community standards. She asked residents not to approach the owner. The email made Daniel sound dangerous. At the Lakeside Cafe, people began talking. Some assumed he was homeless. Others said he was probably trying to live on the yacht without paying rent. A resident named Howard Bell told Vanessa he had seen Daniel carrying fuel cans. They were empty diesel cans, Howard later admitted. But at the time, Vanessa made it sound like he was storing explosives. Within 24 hours, the old yacht had become the biggest scandal in the neighborhood. What no one knew was that Daniel had spent Friday morning at the Wabash County courthouse. The county clerk, Ruth Alvarez, had known Daniel's mother for nearly 40 years. When Daniel entered her office, she looked at the folded violation notice in his hand and sighed. "They still don't know?" she asked. "Apparently not." Ruth pulled the marina file from the archive. Inside was the original 1968 deed, several survey maps, the subdivision agreement, and the current ownership transfer. Daniel asked for 3 certified copies of each document. Then he showed Ruth the HOA notice. She read it twice. "They cannot remove your boat." "I know. They cannot even order you off that property." "I know that too." "Are you going to tell them?" Daniel looked through the courthouse window toward the lake. "I sent a letter." The letter had been prepared by Daniel's attorney, Laura Bennett. It stated clearly that Daniel Mercer was the owner of Mercer Point Marina. It ordered the HOA not to touch, move, board, tow, or otherwise interfere with the Eleanor. It also instructed the association to direct all future communication to Laura's office. The letter was delivered by certified mail on Friday afternoon. Vanessa signed for it personally. She did not show it to the full board. Instead, she called an emergency meeting on Saturday morning. According to meeting notes, Vanessa told the board that Daniel's lawyer had sent an intimidation letter containing unsupported ownership claims. One board member, Michael Trent, asked whether the HOA should suspend enforcement until the title could be confirmed. Vanessa refused. "If we back down now," she said, "every rule we have becomes optional." Michael asked, "Do we actually own Dock 12? Vanessa replied, "We control the marina. That is all that matters." The board voted 4-1 to remove the yacht. The removal contract went to Harlan Shore Services. When the contractor inspected the Eleanor, he told Vanessa the yacht could not be safely towed in its current condition. The engines were not operational. The hull might shift under heavy strain. Moving it improperly could damage the dock or sink the vessel in the channel. The contractor recommended giving the owner additional time. Vanessa refused. She wanted the yacht gone before the community's summer kickoff party. According to an email later introduced as evidence, she wrote, "I do not care how you remove it. Dismantle it if necessary. Make sure it is gone before the weekend." That sentence would eventually cost the HOA hundreds of thousands of dollars. But on Tuesday morning, Vanessa believed it proved she was in control. Daniel arrived at 9:17. The demolition had begun 14 minutes earlier. By then, the excavator had crushed the upper cabin. The mast lay across the dock. A section of teak railing floated beside the stern. Daniel stood without moving. He had repaired vessels damaged by hurricanes. He had seen fishing boats burned to the waterline. He knew wood could be replaced, engines could be rebuilt, hardware could be recast. But when the excavator bucket came down through the cabin, it struck the small navigation desk where his father had kept the family logbook. It crushed the desk, the brass compass, and the wooden toolbox Thomas Mercer had used for 40 years. That was the moment Daniel's face changed. Not with rage, with grief. Vanessa mistook it for defeat. "This could have been avoided," she said. "You were given proper notice." Daniel stepped over a broken strip of mahogany and picked up the yacht's nameplate. Then came the exchange the residents would repeat for years. "Who authorized this?" "I did." "Did anyone check the deed?" "The HOA controls this marina." "No, you rent it." Vanessa laughed again. Several residents laughed with her. Then Daniel called the sheriff. Sheriff Alan Boyd arrived 20 minutes. Later, Vanessa met him in the parking lot. "Thank goodness," she said. "This man has been trespassing for days. He is interfering with an authorized HOA action." The sheriff looked past her. Daniel was standing beside his pickup, holding the broken brass nameplate. Boyd removed his hat. "Mr. Mercer," he said quietly, "I'm sorry about your boat." Vanessa's expression changed. "You know him?" "I knew his parents." "He does not live here." "No," Boyd said. "But that is not the same thing as trespassing." Daniel handed the sheriff a certified copy of the deed. Vanessa moved closer. Boyd read the first page, then the second. Then he turned to the attached survey. "You should stop the demolition," he told Vanessa. "The board approved it. The board does not own this marina." Vanessa crossed her arms. "We have maintained and controlled it for years. That is a civil arrangement. This document lists Daniel Mercer as the legal owner." One resident lowered his phone. Another whispered, "Mercer?" Vanessa looked toward the wooden sign at the marina entrance, Mercer Point. For the first time, the name meant something. She reached for the deed. Daniel pulled it back. "You'll receive a copy through my attorney." Vanessa's voice became sharper. "This proves nothing about your vessel. The HOA still has enforcement authority." Daniel looked at the wreckage. "You were sent written notice that you had no authority to touch it. That letter was disputed. You signed for it." Vanessa did not answer. Sheriff Boyd asked the contractor to shut down the excavator. Daniel then made 3 phone calls. The first was to his attorney. The second was to a marine surveyor. The third was to the insurance company listed on the HOA's public records. He never raised his voice. He never threatened Vanessa. That frightened her more than anger would have. The emergency community meeting took place 2 nights later. Every chair in the clubhouse was filled. Residents stood along the walls and crowded into the hallway. At the front of the room sat Vanessa, 4 board members, and the HOA's attorney. Across from them sat Daniel, Laura Bennett, Ruth Alvarez from the county clerk's office, and a representative from the HOA's insurance carrier. Through the clubhouse windows, the remains of the Eleanor could still be seen behind a line of yellow caution tape. Vanessa called the meeting to order. She began with a prepared statement. The board acted in good faith to remove a dangerous and unauthorized vessel after repeated violations by a non-resident. Laura Bennett waited until Vanessa finished. Then she placed a large survey map on the table. Before we discuss the vessel, Laura said, we should establish where this meeting's authority ends. Ruth Alvarez unfolded the map. It showed Mercer Point Marina, the launch ramp, the parking area, the service road, and the surrounding shoreline. Each parcel was outlined in red. Ruth pointed to the first one, Marina Docks, then the second, Boat Launch, then the third, Access Road. Then the narrow strip extending into the lake, submerged land rights. A resident near the back asked, who owns all of that? Ruth turned over the certified property record. Daniel Thomas Mercer. The room went silent. Vanessa leaned toward the map. That cannot be correct. The HOA has operated the marina since the development was built. Laura nodded. Under a license agreement. She produced another document. The association was granted limited access and management privileges. It was never transferred ownership. One board member, Michael Trent, covered his face with his hand. He had asked the question before the vote. Vanessa had dismissed him. She tried another argument. Even if Mr. Mercer owns the underlying property, the HOA still had a duty to protect residents from unsafe conditions. Laura slid the certified letter across the table. This was delivered to your office 4 days before the demolition. Vanessa said nothing. Laura continued. It identified Mr. Mercer as the owner. It included the deed reference number. It explicitly prohibited the association from moving or damaging the vessel. The insurance representative looked at Vanessa. Did you forward this letter to the carrier? No. To the board's attorney? Vanessa hesitated. No. To the contractor? No. Michael Trent stared at her. You told us it was just a threat. It was an unverified claim. Ruth Alvarez spoke from the other side of the table. It could have been verified with one phone call. A low murmur moved through the room. Laura then opened the marina agreement. Section 14, she said, states that deliberate damage to the owner's property constitutes a material breach. She read the consequences. Immediate suspension of management authority. Termination of docking privileges. Liability for restoration costs. Responsibility for damages caused by contractors hired by the HOA. A resident named Howard Bell raised his hand. Are you saying Daniel can close the marina? Laura looked at Daniel. He can terminate the HOA's access agreement today. The room erupted. Some residents turned toward Vanessa. Others began asking what would happen to their boats. Vanessa raised her voice. You see, this is extortion. He is using one old boat to punish an entire community. Daniel spoke for the first time since the meeting began. I have not closed anything. The room quieted. I did not come back here to take the lake away from people, he said. My grandfather built that marina so working families could use it. My mother kept it open for the same reason. He looked through the window at the Eleanor. But your board destroyed my father's yacht after being told in writing that it had no authority to touch it, Vanessa said. The boat was deteriorated. Daniel turned toward her. It was mine. 3 words, nothing more. No speech could have made the point better. The financial damage was worse than anyone expected. The Eleanor was not valued as an ordinary used yacht. Marine surveyor Peter Lang determined that it was a one-of-a-kind, hand-built vessel with historical significance to the lake. Before the demolition, the yacht's value in unrestored condition was estimated at $185. Fully restored, it could have been worth between $580,000 and $640,000. But the largest problem involved the parts that could not be replaced. The original helm had been carved from a single piece of mahogany by Thomas Mercer. The brass compass had come from Samuel Mercer's first riverboat. The handwritten construction plans had been stored under the navigation desk. Most of them were destroyed. The HOA's insurance carrier also discovered that Vanessa had acted outside the board's normal enforcement process. She had ignored legal notice. She had failed to obtain an environmental assessment. She had hired a contractor to demolish a vessel without confirming ownership. And she had ordered the work to continue after being warned that dismantling the boat could contaminate the water with fuel, oil, and treated wood. Because the conduct might be classified as intentional rather than accidental, the insurer reserved the right to deny part of the claim. That meant the HOA itself, and possibly Vanessa personally, could be responsible. The residents who had applauded the demolition began calculating what a special assessment might cost them. Suddenly, the peeling paint on the Eleanor did not seem like the neighborhood's biggest problem. Vanessa tried to blame Harlan Shore Services. The contractor responded by releasing her email. I do not care how you remove it, dismantle it if necessary. The email was read aloud at the next board meeting. Vanessa's face went pale. Then the contractor played a recorded voicemail. Her voice filled the clubhouse. I want that eyesore gone. If the owner comes back, security can deal with him. No one spoke after the recording ended. Daniel did not smile. He did not look pleased. This was not the revenge he wanted. The yacht was still destroyed. His father's tools were still buried beneath broken wood. Winning the argument did not bring any of it back. That was the part Vanessa had never understood. She thought every conflict was about control. For Daniel, it had always been about stewardship. A week later, Daniel presented the HOA with 3 conditions. First, Vanessa Crowley had to resign as president and from every marina-related committee. Second, the HOA had to fund either the full restoration of the Eleanor or the construction of an accurate replacement using surviving plans, photographs, and original materials wherever possible. Third, any new marina agreement had to include strict limits on HOA authority. No vessel could be seized, removed, or damaged without independent ownership verification, written legal review, and a meaningful appeal process. The agreement would also protect older boats that were safe but did not meet Vanessa's preferred appearance standards. Michael Trent asked Daniel what would happen if the HOA refused. Daniel answered honestly, "The current license will end. That would mean every resident would need to negotiate directly with him for dock access. Parking privileges could be revoked. The HOA would lose control of the launch ramp. The elegant waterfront community would still have a lake, but it would no longer have guaranteed access to it." The board accepted all 3 conditions. Vanessa refused to resign voluntarily, so the residents removed her by a vote of 87 to 6. She left the clubhouse through a side door. There was no applause. Daniel had asked the residents not to humiliate her. She did enough damage believing humiliation was the same thing as leadership, he said. That sentence changed how many people saw him. He had the power to punish the whole community. He chose not to. Over the following months, pieces of the Eleanor were collected from the demolition site. Some mahogany planks could be saved. The bronze cleats survived. So did one cabin door, half of the rear railing, and the broken brass nameplate Daniel had picked up that morning. A team of wooden boat specialists from Missouri and Arkansas agreed to rebuild the yacht. They worked from family photographs, old measurements, and a partial set of plans Daniel found in his mother's attic. The project took 14 months. Residents volunteered. Some sanded wood, some raised money. Some brought photographs of the Eleanor from summers long forgotten. Even Howard Bell, who had supported Vanessa's original complaint, spent 3 weekends cleaning salvaged brass fittings. "I thought it was just an ugly old boat," he told Daniel. Daniel handed him a polishing cloth. "Most old things look worthless if you don't know their story." By the following autumn, the marina had changed. The large sign at the entrance was replaced. The new one used the original lettering from 1968. Mercer Point Marina, established by Samuel Mercer. Beneath it, in smaller letters, was a new line: "Old boats welcome, safe boats required." The rule became popular. Owners began restoring small fishing boats and runabouts that would never have met Vanessa's cosmetic standards. Daniel reopened his father's machine shed as a community workshop. On Saturday mornings, he taught teenagers how to rebuild carburetors, repair fiberglass, and tie proper dock lines. He charged nothing. "Tools only matter when someone teaches you how to use them," he said. The HOA renewed its marina agreement under the new terms. Dock fees dropped because the association was no longer paying consultants, enforcement contractors, and unnecessary management charges. The marina looked less exclusive, but it felt more alive. Honoring the rebuilt Eleanor returned to the water on September 6, 2025. Nearly 200 people gathered along the shoreline. The yacht's mahogany hull had been polished until it reflected the lake. The brass rails shone again. The original engines had been rebuilt. On the rear deck, workers installed the repaired nameplate Daniel had saved from the demolition. The cracks were still visible. Daniel had refused to replace it. At the dedication ceremony, Michael Trent handed Daniel the final construction log. Inside were the names of every person who had helped rebuild the yacht. Daniel opened the book and placed it beside his father's surviving photograph. He did not give a long speech. He thanked the workers. He thanked the residents. Then he started the engines. For several seconds, the port engine turned slowly. It coughed once. Then both engines settled into a deep, even rhythm. The sound carried across the marina. Some of the older residents began to cry. Daniel stood at the helm where his father had once stood. Before leaving the dock, he looked toward the clubhouse. Vanessa Crowley no longer lived at Mercer Point. Her family had sold their home 6 months after the lawsuit was settled. The exact amount was confidential, but the HOA's public financial records showed a payment large enough to cover the yacht's reconstruction, Daniel's legal costs, and the restoration of the damaged dock. Daniel could have named the workshop after himself. He did not. A small wooden sign above the door read, "Thomas Mercer Marine Shop. Fix what can be fixed, respect what cannot be replaced," inside the office. Mounted on the wall was a splintered piece of wood recovered from the Eleanor's original cabin. Beneath it was a brass plaque. It did not mention Vanessa. It did not mention the lawsuit. It carried only one sentence: "Authority is temporary. Responsibility remains." People around Mercer Point still tell the story of the morning the HOA demolished the marina owner's yacht. Some tell it as a warning about arrogant boards. Some tell it as a story about property rights. Others remember the deed, the packed clubhouse, and the moment the county clerk revealed that the HOA did not own a single inch of the ground it had claimed to control. But Daniel Mercer remembered something else. He remembered standing beside the wreckage with his father's broken nameplate in his hands. He remembered how easy it would have been to let anger decide what happened next. And he remembered the lesson his father had taught him decades earlier while repairing a cracked wooden hull. Damage tells you what a thing is made of, Thomas had said. But the repair tells you what the owner is made of. Vanessa saw an old yacht and believed it belonged to a powerless man. She saw faded paint, worn wood, and oil-stained clothes. She never saw the history beneath them. She never checked the name on the deed. And by the time she did, the marina, the residents, and the entire county had already learned the truth. The quietest man on the dock was not trespassing. Everyone else was standing on his land.